The billionaire CEO hates women coming near him, yet fell to the blind maid's touch. No one dared stand within arm's length of Sebastian Crowe, not the executives who lowered their voices when he walked by, not the investors who stared at the floor when he entered boardrooms, and especially not the women who had tried and failed to break through the invisible barrier he carried everywhere. Before I continue this story, let me ask you this. Have you ever watched someone build walls so high around themselves that no one could reach them? If you have, this story will touch your heart in ways you never expected. Hit subscribe now, because what you're about to hear isn't just another billionaire tale. It's about the moment when power meets its match in the gentlest of ways. Sebastian Crowe wasn't just rich. He was Europe's coldest financial genius, building a multi-billion-dollar empire before his 40th birthday. People called him the Winter King behind his back. To his face, no one dared say anything unless spoken to first. His mansion outside London employed 30 staff members who lived by one golden rule: do not touch Mr. Crowe ever. It wasn't just a preference, it was law. A housekeeper who accidentally brushed his sleeve while serving coffee was fired on the spot. A new security guard who offered a handshake during introduction cleared out his locker that same hour. The staff whispered theories. He was germophobic. He was traumatized. He was just cruel. What they didn't know was that Sebastian's coldness hid something broken. Years before, during a violent corporate takeover, he'd developed a neurological condition. Unexpected touch triggered panic attacks, racing heart, shaking hands, and crushing memories he fought to bury. His doctors suggested therapy. Sebastian fired them. He controlled billion-dollar mergers and market shifts. Why not this? Instead, he built a life where no human contact was necessary. His staff feared him. His business partners respected him. Women tried to seduce him for his fortune, but none got close enough to touch his hand, let alone his heart. Sebastian convinced himself it was better this way. People were unpredictable. Touch was dangerous. And for 15 years, his system worked perfectly. Until one rainy Tuesday evening, when his head of household made an unexpected request. "Sir, we found a replacement for the East Wing position." Sebastian didn't look up from his papers. "And? She's different." His pen stopped. "Different how?" "She's blind, sir." Sebastian's face remained expressionless, but something in his mind shifted. "Then she won't stare," he said coldly. "Hire her." He had no idea those 4 words would change everything. Her name was Maribel Raines, 26 years old, blind since childhood, not born that way. Her sight was stolen by an illness that went untreated after her parents died in a factory accident. Their deaths left her alone in the world at age 8. But Maribel never became what the world expected: bitter, helpless, or defeated. She learned to navigate darkness with quiet strength and an almost supernatural ability to sense what others missed. When she arrived at the mansion gates, the staff studied her with curiosity. She carried a simple backpack and a folding cane. No service dog. No special requests, just a woman ready to work. "Miss Raines," the head housekeeper said formally, "you understand this position requires absolute precision. The employer is particular." Maribel smiled slightly. "I've been cleaning houses since I was 12, Mrs. Powell. My hands know what my eyes don't." "It's not your abilities I question," Mrs. Powell said quietly. "It's whether you can handle him." Before Maribel could ask what that meant, she was whisked through orientation. The rules were numerous, but one stood above all: never under any circumstances touch Mr. Crowe. Other staff watched her training with doubt in their eyes. How could a blind woman clean a mansion where a single misplaced item meant immediate dismissal? How would she avoid accidental contact in narrow hallways? Some placed secret bets on how long she'd last. The most generous gave her a week. What none of them understood was that Maribel's blindness gave her gifts they didn't possess. She felt air currents when doors opened. She could tell who entered a room by their footsteps. And most importantly, she heard what people meant beneath what they said. On her 3rd day, while polishing silver in the kitchen, she heard the staff gossiping. "Poor thing doesn't know what she's in for. I give her till Friday before she breaks something valuable." Maribel continued working, her fingers never missing a spot on the ornate silver pattern. That evening, as she made her way through the East Wing, she sensed someone watching. The air changed, became charged with a presence so intense it made the hairs on her arms rise. Sebastian Crow stood at the end of the hallway, observing her work silently. Unlike the others, Maribel didn't freeze or stammer. She simply continued her task, seemingly unaware of his presence. But she knew he was there. And for the first time in years, Sebastian found himself curious about another human being. For weeks, Maribel moved through Sebastian's mansion like a ghost. Silent, efficient, invisible. Unlike other staff who tensed when Sebastian entered a room, she continued working as if nothing changed. Her lack of fear fascinated him, though he'd never admit it. One night, Sebastian stood in his office, staring out at the city lights below. The weight of a difficult merger negotiation pressed on his shoulders. He hadn't slept in days. The door opened softly behind him. "Water, sir," Maribel announced quietly, carrying a silver tray with a glass. Sebastian didn't turn. "Leave it on the desk." She moved carefully toward the sound of his voice, feeling the edge of his massive desk with her free hand. As she set down the glass, she misjudged the distance. Her fingers brushed against his wrist. Time stopped. Security cameras caught what happened next. The footage would later be reviewed dozens of times by confused security staff. The head of security, watching from the monitoring room, immediately radioed the team. "Code red, office, now!" Staff in nearby rooms froze. Some covered their mouths, others closed their eyes, unable to watch the inevitable explosion. Two security guards burst through the door, but Sebastian hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't called for help. He stood perfectly still, looking at his wrist where her fingers had touched. His face showed something no one had seen before. Not anger, not panic, just wonder. "Sir, should we remove her?" one guard asked, already reaching for Maribel's arm. "No." Sebastian's voice was barely audible. "Leave us." Confused, the guards backed out, closing the door behind them. Maribel stood with her head bowed. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Crow. I didn't mean to." "How did you do that?" he interrupted. She tilted her head. "Do what, sir?" Sebastian studied her, genuinely confused. For the first time in 15 years, someone had touched him without triggering his panic, without making his heart race, without flooding his mind with darkness. Instead, he felt calm. "Leave," he said softly. Maribel nodded and found her way out, closing the door gently behind her. That night, Sebastian didn't sleep, but for once, it wasn't nightmares keeping him awake. It was questions he couldn't answer. 3 days passed without a word from Sebastian about the incident. Maribel assumed she'd keep her job only until her replacement was found. Then came the call that shocked everyone. "Mr. Crow requests Miss Rains in the library. Immediately." Staff exchanged looks of confusion. Sebastian never requested specific employees unless they were about to be fired. Certainly never for a private meeting. Mrs. Powell escorted Maribel to the library doors. "Remember your training," she whispered. "No sudden movements, no touching. Answer only what he asks." Maribel nodded, though inside she wondered what made everyone so afraid of one man. The library doors opened to the smell of leather-bound books and wood polish. Sebastian sat behind a desk, the afternoon sun streaming through tall windows behind him. "Miss Rains," he said, "please sit." She found the chair across from him, guided by his voice. For nearly a minute, Sebastian said nothing, just studied her. Most people squirmed under his silent observation. Maribel didn't. She sat calmly, hands folded in her lap. "You don't fear me," he finally said. "Not a question." "I fear being useless," she replied honestly. "Not people." Something in Sebastian's expression changed, a microscopic crack in his perfect mask. "How did you lose your sight?" he asked abruptly. "An infection after my parents died. We couldn't afford treatment." "And yet you don't seem bitter about it." Maribel smiled slightly. "Would bitterness give me back my eyes?" Sebastian leaned forward. "Most people avoid speaking to me unless necessary. You speak as if we're equals." "Aren't we?" she asked simply. For the first time in years, Sebastian felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Not panic, not anger, curiosity. "What's it like?" he asked, his voice losing its edge. "Living without seeing?" "What's it like building walls so high no one can reach you?" she countered. Sebastian almost smiled. Almost. You may go, he said. But as she left, he added something that shocked the staff member waiting outside. I'd like to speak with Miss Rains again tomorrow. Same time. And just like that, the invisible wall around Sebastian Crow gained its first crack. Their daily conversations became routine. Sebastian asked questions about Maribel's life, how she navigated the world without sight, how she learned to read Braille, how she endured losing her parents so young. What began as curiosity evolved into something neither of them expected: understanding. One evening, Maribel finished her duties early and walked through the East Wing corridor. She paused when she heard Sebastian's voice from his private study. I don't care if it costs another 10 million, he said firmly. Those children need proper facilities and trained staff. Transfer the funds tomorrow, anonymously, as always. Maribel stepped back, not wanting to eavesdrop, but her cane knocked against the table. The call ended abruptly. Who's there? Sebastian demanded. I'm sorry, Mr. Crow, Maribel replied. I was just passing by. The door opened. How much did you hear? She hesitated. Something about a children's facility. Sebastian stood silent for so long Maribel thought he might fire her on the spot. Instead, he surprised her. Come in. His private study felt different from the rest of the mansion. Warmer, less imposing. Maribel sensed it held more of the real Sebastian than any other space. What you heard stays between us, he said. Of course. Sebastian poured himself a drink. The public sees what I allow them to see, a cold, ruthless businessman. They don't need to know about the rest. The rest? He sighed. Rehabilitation centers for trauma survivors, medical research, scholarships for disabled students, clean water projects in forgotten villages. Maribel realized she was glimpsing a side of Sebastian Crow the world never saw. Why keep it secret, she asked. Because charity done for attention isn't charity. It's marketing. Before she could respond, Sebastian's breathing suddenly changed, became shallow, rapid. Maribel recognized the signs immediately. Mr. Crow, you're having an anxiety attack. His voice strained. I know what's happening to me. May I help? She asked calmly. He didn't answer, which she took as permission. Without touching him, she guided him through breathing exercises, her voice steady and sure. Slowly, his breathing normalized. How did you know what to do? He asked afterward. I've had panic attacks since losing my sight, she said simply. We all have our battles, Mr. Crow. Neither noticed Mrs. Powell watching from the doorway, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. The mansion buzzed with whispers. Staff noticed the changes in Sebastian, how he specifically requested Maribel's assistance, how their conversations lasted longer each day. Some found it touching, others grew jealous. One morning, all staff gathered in the main hall for weekly instructions. Mrs. Powell stood rigidly at the front. A serious matter has come to my attention, she announced. Mr. Weston's watch, a $50,000 Patek Philippe, has gone missing from the guest suite. The room fell silent. We've conducted a preliminary investigation, Mrs. Powell continued, and found evidence pointing to a specific individual. Her cold gaze landed on Maribel, who stood unaware of the stare, but sensed the sudden tension. Miss Rains, please step forward. Confused, Maribel moved to the front. A cleaning cloth with your assigned mark was found beneath the dresser, Mrs. Powell stated, and security reports you entered the room outside your scheduled duties. Gasps filled the room. Staff members stepped away from Maribel as if theft were contagious. I did enter to replace fresh flowers, Maribel said calmly, but I never touched anything on the dresser. Mrs. Powell's voice hardened. We've called security to escort you off the premises while police are notified. Two security guards approached. Maribel stood still, her face composed despite the public humiliation. Is there a problem? The voice cut through the room like ice. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Powell straightened. Just handling a theft situation, sir. By publicly accusing a staff member without evidence? Sebastian asked. We have evidence. Check the cameras. Mrs. Powell blinked. Sir? Every room has security cameras, Mrs. Powell. You know this. Check the footage before making accusations. The head of security hurried to retrieve the video. Minutes later, he returned, looking uncomfortable. The footage shows Miss Raines entering only to change flowers, sir. She never approached the dresser. He hesitated. It also shows Mrs. Powell entering later, handling the watch and placing something under the furniture. The room went completely silent. Sebastian's voice remained eerily calm. Mrs. Powell, 15 years of service ends today. Collect your things. He turned to Maribel. Miss Raines, your salary is doubled, effective immediately. As Mrs. Powell was escorted out, Sebastian addressed the remaining staff. Let this be clear. In this house, truth matters more than position. Remember that. The hardest part isn't building an empire. It's keeping it when jealousy, lies, and betrayal test you. If you've ever faced unfair accusations and wished someone powerful would stand up for truth, you understand what just happened. Don't just watch. Subscribe. Join others who believe in justice, second chances, and the quiet power of dignity under fire. After the incident with Mrs. Powell, things changed. Sebastian began requesting Maribel's assistance with tasks beyond her housekeeping duties, first with organizing documents in Braille, then with managing his schedule, eventually with being present during his most difficult business calls. You have a calming effect, he admitted one evening, though the words seemed to pain him. What started as occasional assistance evolved into daily routine. Maribel arrived at his office each morning at precisely 8, carrying tea he never requested but always accepted. She organized papers with a system only they understood, anticipating which files he would need before he asked. The staff watched this transformation with fascination. The man who once fired an employee for breathing too loudly now listened patiently as Maribel read correspondence aloud, sometimes correcting her pronunciation of foreign business terms with unexpected gentleness. One night, Sebastian suffered a migraine so severe it left him gripping his desk, eyes shut against even the dimmest light. Maribel heard his sharp intake of breath from outside the door. She entered without knocking, something no one else would dare. Your medication, she said, placing pills and water nearby. Sebastian didn't respond, lost in waves of pain. The migraine disrupted his careful control. His breathing grew ragged. What happened next shocked them both. His hand reached out blindly, searching, found hers, and held on. Maribel froze, understanding the significance. For a moment she considered pulling away, not for her sake, but for his carefully constructed rules. Instead, she stayed still, allowing his fingers to grip hers while the medication took effect. Minutes passed in silence. His breathing steadied. Why doesn't it happen with you? He finally asked, voice barely audible. What? The panic, the fear. His eyes remained closed. When others touch me, my body treats it like an attack. But with you, there's nothing. Just calm. Maribel considered her answer carefully. Perhaps because I don't want anything from you. Sebastian opened his eyes, studying her face. Everyone wants something. Not everyone, she replied simply. That night, alone in his room, Sebastian stared at his hand, the one that had reached for hers. He realized something that shook him to his core. I'm not afraid of touch, he whispered to the empty room. I'm afraid of betrayal. The whispers began in the boardroom. Alexander Hugo, Sebastian's chief financial officer and longest-serving board member, watched the changes in his boss with growing concern. The cold, calculating businessman who built an empire through ruthless precision was becoming distracted. It's the blind girl, Voss told selected board members during a private dinner. He's spending hours with her daily. Important decisions delayed. Meetings rescheduled. The whispers spread, from boardroom to investor meetings, from investor meetings to business columns, from business columns to social media speculation. What hold does the blind maid have on Europe's coldest CEO? Crow Industries stock dips as CEO's judgment question. Sources close to billionaire concerned about emotional compromise. Sebastian ignored it all, until the morning his head of PR placed 6 newspapers on his desk. They're attacking her character, the PR director explained, suggesting ulterior motives, hinting at manipulation. Sebastian's face darkened as he scanned the headlines. One photo showed Maribel entering the mansion, her face partially visible. The caption read, "The woman behind the billionaire's sudden change of heart." That afternoon, Maribel overheard staff discussing the articles. She felt their stares, sensed their changed attitudes. Some who had been friendly now kept distance, afraid of association. She knocked on Sebastian's office door that evening. "Come in, Maribel," he called, using her first name, something new that still felt foreign to them both. She stood before his desk, back straight, face composed despite the pain he heard in her voice. "I should resign." Sebastian set down his pen. "Why?" "You know why. The rumors are hurting your company, your reputation. And this concerns you. How? Your work matters to thousands of people. Mine doesn't." She placed a folded letter on his desk. "My resignation, effective immediately." Sebastian didn't touch the paper. "You believe I care what they think?" "You should," she said softly. "Everything you built is at risk because of me." Sebastian stood, circling the desk until he stood directly before her, close enough that she felt his presence, but not his touch. "They think you're my weakness," he said, voice low and intense. "They're wrong. You are my proof that I'm still human." He took the resignation letter and tore it in half. "I don't accept this." The annual European Business Foundation Gala wasn't just any event. It was the gathering where billion-dollar deals happened over champagne, where reputations were made or destroyed with a single handshake. For Sebastian Crowe, it was unavoidable. As the largest donor, his absence would trigger more damaging speculation. 3 days before the event, Sebastian's executive team gathered in his office. "You must attend alone," insisted Diana Chen, his head of public relations. "Show strength, stability. The rumors will fade. Bringing your assistant would only fuel the fire," added Hugo, not bothering to hide his disdain. Sebastian observed them silently, his fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice. "I'll attend," he said, "with Maribel." The room erupted in protests. "The board won't stand for it. The media will have a field day. Your investors will question." Sebastian stood, silencing them instantly. "I didn't ask for opinions." Meeting adjourned. Later that evening, he found Maribel arranging books in the library. He cleared his throat to announce his presence, a courtesy he never showed anyone else. "I have something to ask you," he said. She turned toward his voice. "Yes?" "The Foundation Gala. Will you accompany me?" Maribel went still. "That's not a good idea." "I'm not asking what's good for my image. I'm asking if you'll come." Her hands twisted together. "Why me? Why now?" Sebastian stepped closer. "Because for the first time in years, I want someone beside me who sees the real me." The night of the gala arrived. Flash bulbs exploded as Sebastian's car pulled up to the red carpet. Reporters pressed forward, expecting him to emerge alone as always. When he stepped out and turned to offer his hand to Maribel, the crowd went silent. She emerged wearing a simple blue gown, her hair swept up, her unseeing eyes facing forward with quiet dignity. Sebastian did something no one had ever witnessed. He placed her hand on his arm, guiding her up the steps. The silence shattered as reporters shouted questions. Sebastian ignored them all, walking steadily forward with Maribel at his side. Inside, conversations stopped as they entered. Business titans stared, socialites whispered, board members exchanged alarmed glances. When called to make his annual address, Sebastian approached the podium with Maribel still beside him. "For years," he began, his voice carrying through the silent hall, "I've funded this foundation to help those society overlooks. Yet I've been guilty of the same oversight in my own life." He looked at Maribel. "Until someone who couldn't see me, saw me clearly." The gala became front-page news. Ice King melts. Crowe's public display shocks business world. For once, Sebastian didn't care about the headlines. Something had shifted inside him, a wall crumbling after years of standing firm. Then came the morning that changed everything. Sebastian arrived at his office to find an unexpected visitor waiting. A lean man with silver temples and watchful eyes stood by the window. "Dr. Elias Mercer," the man introduced himself. "We met briefly, 15 years ago, after the incident." Sebastian froze. Dr. Mercer had been one of several specialists who treated him after the violent episode that triggered his neurological condition. "What do you want?" Sebastian asked coldly. To warn you, Mercer placed a file on the desk. I recognized your companion in the news. I felt concerned. Sebastian didn't touch the file. Explain. Miss Rains. Her family name appeared in my research after your incident. Mercer's voice lowered. The factory where her parents died. You acquired it during that hostile takeover. The room seemed to tilt. Sebastian's mind raced through implications. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting nothing, Mercer interrupted. Just finding it remarkable that of all the people in London, the daughter of victims from your most controversial acquisition happens to become your closest confidant. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Get out. After Mercer left, Sebastian opened the file. Documents confirmed everything. The acquisition, the factory accident, the deaths of Jonathan and Eleanor Rains, leaving their daughter orphaned. Their daughter, Maribel. When she entered his office that afternoon, Sebastian was standing by the window, his back to her. You wanted to see me? She asked. How did you lose your parents? His voice was dangerously quiet. I told you, a factory accident. Which factory? Something in his tone made her pause. Northbrook Manufacturing. Why? Sebastian turned. Did you know I owned it? That my cost-cutting decisions likely caused the safety failures that killed them? Maribel went pale. What? Did you orchestrate our meeting? Was this some elaborate plan for revenge? No! The hurt in her voice was raw. I had no idea. 15 years planning the perfect way to get close to me? His voice rose. To make the monster who destroyed your family feel something before you destroyed him too? Tears formed in her unseeing eyes, but her voice remained steady. If that's what you think of me, nothing I say will matter. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Trust isn't demanded, Sebastian. It's earned, and apparently I never earned yours. As the door closed behind her, Sebastian stood alone, surrounded by wealth, power, and now crushing doubt. At the moment when trust is tested the most, many choose the safety of their walls instead of the risk of vulnerability. If you've ever faced a moment where fear of betrayal fought against hope for connection, this channel speaks to your heart. Don't just watch. Subscribe now. Because somewhere, someone else is deciding whether to trust again after being hurt, and your support helps stories of healing reach them when they need it most. For 3 days after Maribel left, Sebastian locked himself in his office, speaking to no one. His staff thought he was angry. They were wrong. He was hunting for truth. Deep in the company archives, Sebastian pulled files from 15 years earlier, the hostile takeover of Northbrook Manufacturing, his first major acquisition, the deal that made his reputation as ruthless and effective. Box after box of documents covered his office floor. Financial reports, safety inspections, employee records. Then he found it. A memo written in his own hand. Cut maintenance budget by 60%. Delay safety upgrades until Q4. Profits first, everything else second. 3 weeks after that memo, a pressure valve failed in the chemical processing section. 2 workers died instantly. Their names, Jonathan and Eleanor Rains. Sebastian's hands trembled as he uncovered more connections. The accident investigation was buried. Medical compensation for survivors was minimal. The orphaned daughter of the Rains family received a settlement that barely covered funeral costs, nothing for her developing eye condition. The girl who lost her parents and later her sight because of his decision was Maribel. Memories flooded back of that period in his life, how the violence during the takeover fight had left him with his neurological condition, how he'd hardened himself afterward, believing that emotions were weakness, that human connection was vulnerability he couldn't afford. He'd built walls to protect himself while destroying lives behind spreadsheets and profit margins. Sebastian pulled out the final document, a photo from the company newsletter, a family day picnic, months before the accident. Jonathan Rains stood smiling, his arm around his wife. Between them, a young Maribel, maybe 7 or 8, her eyes bright and seeing, her future still full of light. He thought of her words from their first real conversation. I fear being useless, not people. Despite everything his actions had cost her, she'd never become bitter, never sought revenge, never even recognized his name as the man responsible for her parents' deaths. Sebastian closed the file, his decision made. He'd spent 15 years building an empire while hiding from his own humanity. It was time to face what he'd done and who he'd become. Maribel sat alone in her small apartment on London's East Side. The place felt empty after months at the mansion. Cold despite the heater running. She hadn't left in days, hadn't eaten properly. The stress of recent events triggered migraines that left her curled in pain. The bottle of specialized medication sat empty on her nightstand. Without her salary from Sebastian, she couldn't afford to refill the prescription that kept her chronic pain at bay. It doesn't matter, she whispered to herself. Start over tomorrow. But tomorrow brought worse pain, and the day after, dizziness that made standing dangerous. On the fourth night after leaving the mansion, Maribel collapsed, reaching for water. She couldn't get up, couldn't reach her phone, could only wait, alone in darkness deeper than her blindness. Meanwhile, Sebastian was searching. After discovering her address from employee records, he'd gone to her apartment, only to find no answer. Neighbors hadn't seen her in days. She gets bad spells sometimes, an elderly woman from the floor below explained. Her eyes cause awful pain. She needs special medicine. Sebastian remembered the small pill bottle Maribel sometimes carried. Do you know what medication? Some expensive thing. Her old caretaker might know. Mrs. Hendricks, 2 streets over. Rain poured as Sebastian found the caretaker's address. The woman answered her door, surprised to find a billionaire on her doorstep. Maribel stopped treatment last year when she couldn't afford it anymore, Mrs. Hendricks explained. She said the job at your mansion would finally let her restart it. What happens without medication? Sebastian asked, dread building. Episodes of pain, eventually seizures. Her condition gets worse without treatment. Sebastian drove back to Maribel's building, pounding on her door. No answer. Panic, the kind he hadn't felt in years, surged through him. Breaking down the door, he found her unconscious on the floor. Maribel! He lifted her carefully, something he would have found impossible weeks ago. Stay with me. Her pulse was weak but steady. In one motion, Sebastian carried her to his car and sped toward the nearest hospital. Hours later, Maribel awoke in a private hospital room, monitors beeping steadily beside her. Sebastian sat nearby, his face showing something she couldn't see but could sense in his voice. Fear. You're going to be okay, he said, relief evident. Why are you here? She asked weakly. Because I was wrong, Sebastian replied. About everything. The doctor who entered was world-renowned. A specialist Sebastian had flown in from Switzerland. Miss Rains, the doctor began, your condition is serious but not irreversible. There's an experimental treatment that might restore partial vision. Maribel's breath caught. That's not possible. It is, Sebastian said quietly, and I'm going to make sure you get it. Experimental treatment for optic nerve regeneration costs $14 million, Sebastian explained, pacing the hospital room. Insurance won't cover it. Clinical trials are limited. Maribel sat propped against pillows, still weak from her collapse. I can't accept that kind of money from you. You're not accepting anything. I'm repaying a debt. He told her everything about Northbrook Manufacturing, her parents, how his decisions had led to their deaths, and ultimately, her blindness. I've spent 15 years building an empire while hiding from what I did to your family, Sebastian said, his voice raw with honesty. This isn't charity, it's justice. 3 days later, Sebastian called an emergency board meeting at Crow Industries headquarters. The executive team gathered, tension thick in the air. The Medical Research Division will immediately fund a new initiative, Sebastian announced. $14 million for optic nerve regeneration treatment. Alexander Hugo stood up. That's impossible. The research budget is allocated for the year. Then reallocate. For one person? Hugo scoffed. The board won't approve frivolous spending for your personal interests. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Put it to a vote. Hours later, the results came in. 7 votes against, 5 in favor. The board had blocked him. That night, Sebastian made the hardest decision of his life. Lawyers worked through dawn preparing documents. By morning, business channels broke the shocking news. Sebastian Crow sells controlling interest in Crow Industries. Steps down as CEO. The corporate world reeled. Stocks fluctuated wildly. No one understood why Europe's most powerful CEO would suddenly abandon his life's work. No one except Maribel. She confronted him in her hospital room, tears streaming down her face. You sold your company, your legacy, everything you built? Sebastian sat beside her bed, calm in a way he'd never been before. Not everything, just my shares. Enough to fund not only your treatment, but an entire research center for vision restoration. I never asked you to give up everything, she whispered. Sebastian took her hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Some things matter more than power, he said quietly. I'm just beginning to see that clearly. For 15 years, he had built walls to protect himself from touch, from connection, from his own guilt. Now, as those walls crumbled, Sebastian discovered something unexpected on the other side. Freedom. Alexander Hugo wasted no time after Sebastian's departure. Within weeks, he called a shareholder meeting, positioning himself as the necessary strong leader to correct the company's direction after recent irregularities. The business press ran stories questioning Sebastian's mental state. Investors worried about stability. Board members who had once feared Sebastian now rallied behind Hugo. What no one knew was that Sebastian had spent his last days as CEO gathering evidence about the original Northbrook takeover, about the accident cover-up, and about who had really orchestrated the violence that left him traumatized. Sebastian received the call on a Tuesday morning. His former assistant, still loyal, whispered, Hugo is moving to permanently remove your board allies today. If he succeeds, you'll never get back in. 2 hours later, Sebastian walked into Crow Industries headquarters for the first time since stepping down. Security guards, unsure whether to stop their former boss, stepped aside as he moved purposefully toward the boardroom. He pushed open the doors as Hugo was mid-sentence. Regrettable but necessary change in leadership? Hugo stopped cold. Please continue, Sebastian said, his voice carrying across the stunned room. I'm curious how you plan to explain your role in the Northbrook deaths. Hugo recovered quickly. This is a private meeting. Security. Before they arrive, Sebastian said, placing a flash drive on the table, you might want to see what's on here. The board chair, sensing something significant, inserted the drive into the projection system. Documents appeared on screen. Emails, financial transfers, and surveillance photos showing a younger Hugo meeting with masked men the day before the violence at Northbrook. You arranged the attack during the takeover, Sebastian said, his voice steady. You wanted me broken, controllable. And when I developed a fear of human contact, you made sure no one got close enough to threaten your position. Hugo lunged for the drive, but security guards blocked him. These are fabrications, he snarled. The British Financial Authority doesn't think so, Sebastian replied. They received copies this morning. The boardroom doors opened again. Everyone turned, expecting police. Instead, Maribel stood in the doorway. She walked forward slowly, a cane in one hand, dark glasses covering her eyes. The room fell silent as she approached the table. I came to speak for those who can't, she said. My parents, the others who died at Northbrook. Her voice never wavered as she addressed the board. Mr. Crow has accepted responsibility for his past. He sacrificed everything to make amends. But Mr. Hugo, she turned toward his voice, has only tried to bury the truth deeper. Sebastian watched her, amazed at her strength. This company has a choice, Maribel concluded. Continue hiding from past mistakes or build something better from them. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Hugo was removed. Sebastian was reinstated as CEO, effective immediately. As Hugo was escorted out, Sebastian addressed his board for the first time in weeks. I built this company believing that weakness was failure, he said. I was wrong. Real strength is facing your mistakes and changing because of them. 6 months passed in a blur of hospital rooms, research labs, and careful hope. The day Maribel removed her bandages, Sebastian held his breath. Doctors had warned them. The experimental treatment might restore only shadows, perhaps some light perception. Nothing more. I see colors, Maribel whispered, tears streaming down her face. Blurry shapes, movement. It wasn't full sight, it would never be. But after 15 years of darkness, even this partial vision felt like a miracle. By spring, Maribel could make out faces up close, could see enough to navigate familiar spaces without her cane. could recognize Sebastian by the outline of his tall frame before he spoke. On a bright April morning, they stood together on the steps of a newly renovated building in East London. A crowd gathered: media, investors, families with visually impaired children. Sebastian stepped to the microphone, no longer the cold billionaire who flinched from cameras and crowds. "Today we open the Rains Foundation," he announced, named for Jonathan and Elena Rains, whose lives taught us that what we build matters less than who we become while building it. Cameras flashed as he continued. "This center will provide cutting-edge treatment for children with visual impairments. Research that might have saved Maribel's sight years ago will now help thousands." He turned to where Maribel stood nearby. "And I'm pleased to announce our founding director, Maribel Rains." Applause rippled through the crowd as Maribel stepped forward. No longer a maid, no longer defined by blindness. Now a woman whose strength had changed not just one life, but potentially thousands. As she took her place at the podium, Sebastian watched with pride. The man who once couldn't bear being touched now stood comfortably among others. The wall he'd built around himself for 15 years had crumbled completely. After the ceremony, they walked through the center's gardens. Children who would be the first patients played nearby, their laughter filling the air. "I never imagined this," Maribel said softly, "from cleaning your mansion to running a foundation." Sebastian smiled, something that once felt foreign, but now came naturally. "Life looks different when you stop hiding from it." He hesitated, then asked the question he'd been saving. "What do you see now, Maribel?" She turned toward him, her partially restored vision taking in his face, the face she'd first known only through voice and presence. "Everything I always saw in you," she replied, "but now the world sees it too." Sometimes wealth isn't just about money, it's about vision, resilience, and the choices that define us. If this story inspired or moved you, subscribe right now, because somewhere out there, someone else is learning, aspiring, or seeking motivation, and your one click might help them find it.